Us. My name is Kristi Lipp. I am the prevention specialist in Weston County, and I have a few of my colleagues with me today to help present on sources of strength and how we're utilizing the evidence-based program in Wyoming. So Ann Perkins is the prevention specialist in Sheridan County, and then I have Tauna Groomsmith, who is the prevention specialist in Fremont County. And then Kara is with Big Brothers Big Sisters in Fremont, as is Liz. She's one of their peer leaders with Big Brothers Big Sisters in Sources of Strength there in Fremont. And then Travis Silvestri is part of the media crew with Silvestri Customization, and they work with the Fremont County crew on their media. So as we go through the presentation, they're all going to join in a little bit and share how things work in their counties and how its sources of strength has been effective for them. So to start with, there we go. I kind of want to share a parable that we use a lot in Sources of Strength. And it talks about a lady who lived in a village, and she lived near a waterfall. And every day she would take a really long walk along the river's edge and kind of walk along towards the waterfall. And on one day she heard a shout from the water, and she saw a young child who was flailing around in the water and couldn't swim. So she sprung into action, and she ran to the edge of the river and jumped in and saved the young child. And so the next day she was doing the same thing. She was walking along the river and came to the edge towards the waterfall and sees another young child who's struggling and can't swim. And so because of the issues they were having with these young kids in the river, they decided as a community that they needed to do something about it. So they trained a bunch of lifeguards, and they put lifeguards all along the river, and they trained people in CPR and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation and all of these things so that when the kids fell in the river, they could help them. And about a month later, the lady was still doing her morning walks down by the river, and she noticed that they were still having kids falling in the river. Even though they put all of these things into place, it still wasn't keeping the kids from falling in the river. So she decided she was going to walk up the river and see what was happening upstream. And the community and the village just could not understand what she was doing. And they told her, you can't leave, we need you here to help us pull these kids from the river. And her response to them was, I'm going upstream so I can see why the kids are falling in the river in the first place. And so that really, in a nutshell, describes how Sources of Strength works when we look at prevention. So the primary mission of Sources of Strength is to really focus on resiliency and coping strategies and those things that we all have in place, including our young people. And so that's the upstream prevention piece of Sources of Strength. What we know is that a lot of our traditional prevention strategies have been in that intervention mode, things which is not to say that they're not effective. We do a lot of things like QPR and assist trainings, and we have a lot of strategies in place, but we weren't doing a lot of upstream prevention. Now, Sources of Strength also has an intervention piece. That's a secondary benefit of the program. So we know that our peer leaders, the young people that we train to help us implement the program, are 4 times more likely to refer a suicidal friend or student if they have been through the Sources of Strength peer leader training and if they have been a part of the campaigns and the implementation of the program. We also know that postvention is very important when it comes, especially to suicide prevention. And effective postvention is also effective prevention. And Sources of Strength has a piece in postvention as well. One of the very important pieces of building capacity and really trying to gain that capacity before Sources of Strength is implemented is making sure that the schools have an effective suicide prevention plan and some postvention planning in place. And so Sources of Strength really does cover all 3 of those, but the real primary mission is that upstream prevention approach, which is really pretty different than a lot of the prevention efforts that I've done in the 17 years that I've been doing this work. And it's different, and we've done a lot of really great prevention strategies in Wyoming, especially in the last 10 years with suicide prevention, but this is just a little bit different than what we've done in the past. So Sources of Strength is really effective, and it's one of the reasons that it caught my attention when we were looking for an effective suicide prevention program, is that it really does bridge the gaps in prevention. So for a lot of years, we focused our prevention efforts on the risk factors. We know that there are a lot of risk factors that young people face, and those can be environmental, those can be personal, but we would focus on what kids were at risk, what were their risk factors, and what might be making them at the highest risk to use alcohol or substances or to be at risk for suicide. So Sources of Strength is different in the fact that we look at strengths. So as we move and start talking about the wheel here in a little bit, you're going to notice that there are a lot of different strengths that the program focuses on. And so rather than identifying the kids who might be at the highest risk for substance use or suicide or mental health struggles or any of those things, we look at the strengths that we know that every person, every young person has within them. They may not have all of them, but they have at least one, most of the time 2 or 3. And so it really is a different focus in that way. Another piece of traditional prevention was we focused a lot on sad shock trauma. So we have seen a lot of different things in prevention, from mock car crashes to bringing speakers in, and we have the speaker come in and tell the young people in our schools of how they abuse substances, or how they were suicidal for so many years, or all of the struggles that they had in their life. And they spend 45, 50 minutes talking about all of those things, and then in the last 5-10 minutes they would tell us that, but hey, I survived, and so you can too. And not that there is not a place for those things in prevention, but we know that those aren't real effective. Those kind of programs have a lifespan of about 2 to 3 weeks max. And we know that they work for a little while, but then once that shock and trauma wears off, then most kids go right back to the way they were thinking prior to the presentation or to the strategy that was being used. So the gap that Sources of Strength helps fill is we look at hope. We use hope, help, and strength. And so that's the motto. And helping our young people identify what their strengths are, how they can ask for help, who they can ask for help, and that there is hope. And that hope comes in a lot of different forms, and helping them identify what that hope might look like for them. And of course, a lot of our traditional prevention programs or our traditional youth groups were adult-driven. We were actually just having a conversation about this the other day for a different group that I'm involved in, and we were talking about the youth groups that we had about 8-10 years ago in the state of Wyoming. We had some really fantastic youth groups who were working with us in prevention, but those youth groups were all pretty well adult-driven. We gathered students and we asked them to be a part of the work that we were doing, and identified ways that they could help us then share our message. The difference is that Sources of Strength is peer-led. Now, while that comes with its challenges, because we all know that when we allow young people, teenagers to lead things, sometimes those can be challenging, and our adults have to really kind of help steer them in the right direction. But it's not about the adults in the room. The adults in the room are really there to just guide the students and help them with logistics. It's really all about the peers identifying what they think needs to be happening in their school, in their community, and then allowing them to move forward with that with the adult supervision and helping them make it happen. So the Sources of Strength model then is a little bit different than a lot of other models that we use. So I mentioned the adult advisors, that they're really there just to guide the students. one of the core pieces when we start looking at implementing sources of strength is identifying those adult advisors who are supportive. We look for caring and connected and positive adults. They don't have to just be school employees or teachers or people who are in the school building. Even though a lot of our sources of strength programs are based out of schools, that doesn't mean that just the adult advisors just come from the school. A lot of times those adult advisors can be ministers, or they can be parents, or they can be leaders of other youth groups. It really varies. But the three things that we look for, the three criteria, are they are caring, connected, and positive adults. So after we identify those adult advisors, we add the diverse peer leaders to the mix. And I'll share a little bit here in a few minutes about how we identify those peer leaders, because the difference with sources of strength is we look for peer leaders who are influential within their social group. So if you think about a lot of traditional youth groups, even if you look at your student council, your FBLA, a lot of those traditional groups really focus on students who are natural leaders. And while that is empowering, and those students do make huge differences in their schools and their communities, Sources of Strength looks for students who have influence within their social groups. So it's not just those traditional kids who, when you walk down the hall, you'd say, oh yeah, that kid would be a great peer leader, or that kid would be a great peer leader because he's in student council, or he's involved in a lot of activities, or whatever it might be. It's really about looking at the social groups within the schools and making sure that all of those groups are represented. And then the fun part is the strategic messaging campaigns. And again, this is a little bit different than a lot of the media or the strategies, the messaging that we have used in the past. And Travis and Kara and Tauna are going to share a little bit about how they're using the wheel here in a little bit with their messaging and their media campaigns. But the primary focus when we start looking at those messaging campaigns is that they encourage engagement with the entire student body and with the community. There's interaction between positive adults and our peer leaders and our young people. And then that they're able to apply whatever the strength is or whatever we're talking about into their life. And they can identify how it affects them and how they can use it in their life. So it's really, we need those three things when we look at messaging campaigns. And that's part of the challenge when we're working with young people, because of course, a lot of times they come up with really fantastic ideas, and they're thinking like, we had students who wanted to do a color run, and we could use all the colors of the wheel, and it could be a really amazing community event. And they weren't wrong about that, but when we started asking them, okay, so how are you going to include other adults, positive connecting adults with your peers, so that that's a piece and they can interact, and then how can we make sure that our peers and our students and our community members can then apply that to their life. That became a little bit challenging for them. And so that is part of the place where the interesting work comes in with between the adults and the peer leaders. And then of course, if we add those people together, we multiply it by the messaging campaigns, we end up with a positive culture change and positive social norming. And we've done positive social norming in Wyoming for quite a few years, and we really have tried to put a positive spin on a lot of the things we work on in the prevention world. But this is just a little bit different way to look at it, and it doesn't use as much data and some norming things like that. It's more about changing the culture of our schools and our communities, and even just the gathering places where young people gather and they meet. So this is the wheel. This is the basis of Sources of Strength. So Sources of Strength actually was founded by a man in North Dakota, and he was working with the tribes in North Dakota on the reservations, and basically got tired of going to funerals for young people. And he really was trying to figure out what it was that could help them get through the times that they were struggling with without ending in suicide. And so he started looking at the medicine wheel, and that's really where the sources of strength wheel came from. So these are all of the different strengths that we focus on in sources of strength. So family support, positive friends, mentors, healthy activities, generosity, spirituality, medical access. And medical access is actually, they're looking at changing that within the next year or so to physical health rather than the medical access piece, and then mental health. So like I said before, we know that not every person has all of these pieces in their life. But if we start asking, especially with our young people, we can identify that they have at least one, maybe two, most of the time three of these pieces in their life. And if they just can identify what they are and how they can rely on them to help them get through the tough times, then that's where we see the difference. So when we look at family support, one of the things that a lot of times when we are training peer leaders, they will say is, well, I don't have a strong family. I don't have two parents, or I don't live with my grandparents. And we're always quick to assure them that that's okay, because family can be your born family, or it can be your chosen family. And family does not necessarily mean your nuclear family or who you live with. It can be anyone that you consider your family. One of our peer leaders talks about family as her best friend. And they've been best friends since preschool. And when she graduated last year, her best friend's family actually had her senior picture on the wall with all of the other brothers and sisters, all 6 of the other brothers and sisters. And so that was her family. When she talked about family, that's who she talked about. Not her born family, but her chosen family. Positive friends. We always talk to kids about friends, and it's pretty easy for them to identify if they're negative friends. We all have those friends, and it's easier for young people to identify them a lot of times than it is their positive friends. So we always encourage them to see if they can find at least one positive friend in their life, because those are the people that you can rely on when things get tough and can help you get through. And so helping them identify who those positive friends are and who they choose to hang out with or who they choose to be a part of things with really can influence how they cope with things, how they handle things, and how they can move forward in their life. And of course, mentors is a really traditional term. We know that by looking at studies that people who have a strong mentor in their life are more likely to be successful. And that can be another adult. Sometimes that's one of your positive friends. Sometimes that's a teacher. It really does vary. But we encourage our peer leaders and our students to really look for mentors. Look for that positive adult in their life and who that might be, and that trusted adult that they can go to when they need someone to talk to, or they're in trouble, or a friend is in trouble. And that's one of the campaigns that we even focus on, is identifying those trusted adults, because a lot of our peer leaders do not, and our students don't have trusted adults. It was about 2 years ago, even in our elementary school, our counselor went through and asked all of our kindergarten through 5th grade students if they could identify one trusted adult in the elementary school building. And about 65% of them could not name one trusted adult in their school building. And so that was one of the moments when we decided that something needed to change and we needed to start looking at a cultural shift. So really helping them identify who those trusted adults are is really important. Healthy activities is really probably the easiest one on here, and we don't have too many peer leaders or adult leaders even that can say they don't have a healthy activity. What usually is a challenge for them is when they see healthy activities, they think of running or working out or, some kind of physical activity. And so when we start really talking about healthy activities, that can be anything from, horseback riding to reading to listening to music, any of those things that really help when you're in a time of stress, something that you turn to when you're stressed or things are difficult. And very seldom do we have a peer leader or adult advisor or even our students when we do these activities that can't identify at least one thing that they turn to when they're stressed. And so there is a lot of things that fall into that healthy activities category, and there's a lot of different campaigns that we can use with those healthy activities then because of that. Generosity is a piece of the wheel that kids sometimes struggle with, because when we talk about generosity, that when we ask in our trainings, so what does generosity mean to you? A lot of times they respond with, well, donating money or giving someone something. It's a lot of times it's equated with monetary. Sometimes we'll get answers like, well, opening the door for someone, or, just saying good morning. But most of the time they struggle with this generosity piece. And so we really focus on the little things. It doesn't have to be a big thing to fill your cup. Generosity is really those things that you can do for other people that fill your cup and theirs as well. And so we really try to identify little things. And for adults, sometimes that's easier for us to identify those generosity things. But a lot of times it's a challenge too, that we have to look a little bit deeper than what we would traditionally consider generosity. Spirituality is another one that a lot of times takes a lot of discussion and trying to help young people figure out what that means to them. Because when we talk about spirituality, they automatically think of church or a religious belief. And they will say, well, I don't have a spirituality piece. Like, I don't go to church, or I don't belong to a organized religion. And what we tell them is spirituality isn't necessarily religion. It can be. It can definitely be church. It can definitely be your organized religion. And for a lot of people, that is what spirituality is. But there's also a piece of spirituality that really is about something bigger than yourself. And that doesn't mean, a heavenly being or anything like that being bigger than yourself. It's about something that makes you feel that there's more than just you. And so that sometimes is yoga, that's meditation. We have some kids who their spirituality is martial arts, because that's when they feel connected with something bigger than themselves. So spirituality is something that really we ask students to really think about, and our adult advisors too, because we have a lot of adult advisors who really will say, well, I just don't have, spirituality is a strength that I really need to work on. So that one can be a challenge a lot of times, and it can be a challenge on doing campaigns or helping our young people grow that strength, because it can be kind of a touchy one sometimes. Medical access, or what they're going to be changing into physical health, is really things like the ability to, see a doctor, or to have the ability to work out and make yourself healthier from a physical aspect. And that's why they're looking at changing that from medical access to healthy, to physical health, is because we want to start encouraging young people to even include the little things like, taking a walk every day, or drinking water, or whatever it might be. And so medical access really, or physical health really can be a lot of different things. And that's one that sometimes is really easy for people to identify, and other times they'll say, that's really just not something I'm good at. And mental health is one, of course, that's always kind of a difficult topic, because kids think, well, that means going to a counselor, or that means, seeking professional mental health help. And when we talk about the mental health strength of the wheel, we don't just talk about seeking help, or that how important it is to ask for help, but we talk about the things that we can all do to improve our mental health. And sometimes that is our healthy activities. Sometimes that's our spirituality. Sometimes that's our generosity. Mental health a lot of times ties to a lot of other pieces in the wheel. And so, again, when we start working with our peer leaders and our adult advisors, we really try to help them identify at least one of these pieces of the wheel that they're strong in, and maybe one that they're not as strong in, and then they want to work on and try to get stronger So I talked a little bit before about the how peer leaders are identified. This is a 5th grade social network, and this was a large school, a much larger school than most of even our Wyoming schools. And this was 5th graders that they asked, who are your 5 best friends in your school? And then they mapped those kids and how connected they were. So these young people right here were the bridges. And so this was like, that 5th grade boy who's actually got friends who are girls. And this was that girl who actually had a friend that was a boy. Okay, so those are our connectors. There's not very many of them, but they actually connect those, the girls and the boys in this social group. And then we have these central members. So the central members are those people that when they asked who your friends are, a lot of kids named these 2 people. So they have a lot of friends within their social group. They have a lot of influence within their social group as well, because a lot of people, a lot of students named them as their friend. And then we have these peripherals. So these are the young people who, they might have named a couple of these people, but they weren't named as someone who was their friend. So they're a part of the group, but they're really removed a few spots from the actual bridges and those central members. And then we have the isolate over here. This is the one student who didn't name anybody as a friend, and no one named him. And so when we look at this, we know that we not only need these 2 people to be leaders in our schools, but we need these people who are connected to a lot of people, and we also need these peripherals and these isolates who aren't a part of those groups, but may have influence. We have to reach all of those young people. We can't just focus on the 2 groups. And so when we start looking at peer leaders, we do the lunchroom test. So it's a little different this year in the time of COVID, because a lot of students aren't having lunch where they normally would, so it would look a little bit different. But when we first started Sources of Strength in Newcastle, we walked through the lunchroom and we identified who was sitting with who was in this group and who was in this group, and kind of identified the groups that had the group together, where there was some isolates, or there were some kids who really didn't sit with anybody, and we made a list of who those kids were. We also had the motorheads, that we called them, who hung out in the parking lot during lunch and revved their engines and squealed their tires at the end of the school day. And we made sure that when we identified our peer leaders, we had one of those young men in our group as our peer leaders. Because what we know is that we have to have someone in each of those groups that has influence in those groups. So they may not be on student council, they may not be involved in anything else in school, but when you look at their peer group, their peers look at them as the leader, and those are the kids that we wanted as our peer leaders, that Sources of Strength wants us to look at as our peer leaders to help make that culture change happen. So the first year, like I said, when we implemented Sources of Strength in Newcastle, we did the lunchroom test. We thought we did a pretty darn good job of identifying all of those different groups in our high school and who those leaders might be. What we found about 2/3 of the way through the year is that we were missing several groups. And while we thought we had identified students in all of those groups, and we had asked teachers, we had asked peers to recommend each other, we still had missed a lot. So we did our own social network last year, and we learned a couple things from this. We asked on our survey, who are your 5 best friends? Well, because we are a small school and we have several other communities within 30 minutes, we had several students who named best friends from other schools. So that didn't help us when we started looking at our social network. but we still were able to look at who named who and who were the connectors. And that really helped us identify who we were missing and fill in those gaps. Because what we found was, while we had leaders in a lot of our groups, so we had someone from the Motorheads, we had someone from the science group, we had someone from the ag group, we had someone from the basketball team. We thought we had all of those groups represented. What we didn't have a great representation of is our peripherals, or our students who really weren't a part of any particular group, but were friends with people in all of those groups, so those connectors. And that this social network really helped us identify where we were missing. We were able to, because the way we did it, we were able to actually look at names of our students and say, well, this student was named 4 different times with 3 different groups, and we didn't have them on our list. And they helped fill in the gaps. You can't see it in this slide because I had to shrink it to get it to fit, but actually I think you can see one of them right up here. But there really are, there's a couple of peripherals way out here. And those were a couple of our homeschool students who come to school for electives like band or art and are not in the school the rest of the day. And so they were really out on that peripheral. And those were gaps that we did not anticipate, but that we know we need to fill now when we identify our next group of peer leaders. So a really insightful thing, we did this kind of the hard way the first time, and we didn't know that there's a program out there that you can do your survey with, and then it automatically drafts it for you. So we're hoping to try to do that this year. Things are a little bit different right now because we're still all trying to figure out what school is going to look like this year. But we're ready to do that again because it really did shine a light on what we needed to be doing to help focus on our and getting the right peer leaders. So this is just some data about the impact of sources of strength. So there's been a lot of randomized controlled trials and a lot of different things done. This is actually was a trial done with SAMHSA funding, and they looked at 18 different schools, 465 peer leaders, and there was 2,700 students. And what they found was their peer leaders had an increase in healthy coping attitudes and norms. They were more connected to their adults, and they also had a peer leader plus 1 connection, so they all had at least 1 trusted adult. Most of the time they had more than that. They also found that they're 4 times more likely to refer their peers to adults. So when a peer leader found that a friend of theirs was struggling, or they really didn't think they were doing well, they were 4 times more likely to refer them to an adult that they trusted and were more likely to seek help. And they also noticed that the largest gains were for the least connected students, so for those peripherals or those isolates, and for the healthy peer leaders. So it was both. It wasn't just for those students who maybe were struggling, it was for their peer leaders who already had healthy relationships, but they also saw a lot of gain there. From a school population perspective, they saw an increase in help-seeking acceptability. So students were much more likely, it was more accepted as a culture to seek help. It wasn't shunned on for them to ask for help. There was an increased perception that adults would help suicidal peers, so that they were more likely then to actually ask for help. And they saw the largest gains for students with a history of suicide attempts. So a lot of different things that they saw, and most of that focused on help seeking. And so because of that, because of the fact that we really have been focusing on mental health in Wyoming and really making it acceptable to ask for help in our cowboy culture, where it's really easy for people to just say you need to cowboy up and move on with life, figure it out on your own. We've really been trying to change that norm. And Liz, who is a peer leader in Fremont County, has a really good, cool success story of how using the Sources of Strength framework has helped to empower herself and her peers to really start talking about mental health and how they can ask for help. So while Liz is on the Zoom with us, we weren't sure she was going to be able to be on the Zoom with us because of her class schedule. So she recorded this for us, and so we're just going to go ahead and use the video. But she is on, and so when we get to the question and answers later, if you have questions for her as a young person or as a peer leader, definitely feel free to ask her.
Hey, Kristi, we can't hear the audio. You need to enable that in your settings.
Okay, where's that at, Travis?
In your Zoom, I can't see it because in your bottom Zoom ribbon, there should be an option that says like settings or something of that nature.
I think it's when you share your screen. When you click on share screen, there's two things at the very bottom that say optimize audio and optimize video.
Okay, are you guys seeing that? Where am I supposed to be at? I love technology. Share computers, optimize share for full screen video clip or share computer sound?
Share computer sound.
Okay, let's try this.
Good job.
See. We'll find out.
For being mentally ill.
Can you hear that now?
Yeah.
Wishful drinking. Having waited my entire life to win an award for something, I now get awards all the time for being mentally ill. I'm apparently very good at it. Carrie Fisher was diagnosed with bipolar disorder decades ago and decided to be open about her illness. She joked about it in public and even told people that she had undergone multiple different types of treatment, including electroshock therapy. Carrie Fisher was a pioneer in mental health awareness. According to Newsweek, over 42 million people in the United States suffer from a mental illness each year. And of those 42 million, 62% fight the social stigma, the biggest barrier to seeking mental health treatment. Today, I will try to open your eyes and break down the stigma barrier as I show you how stigma affects those with a mental illness and what you can do to help reduce the stigma. Actress and mental health advocate Glenn Close says, "What mental health needs is more sunlight, more candor, more unashamed conversation about illnesses that affect not only individuals, but their families as well." So why don't people talk about mental health? There are several reasons for this. One of the main reasons is that our society witnesses the severe mental illnesses that go untreated. Take Adam Lanza, for instance, the man responsible for killing his mother and then 20 children and 6 adults at the Sandy Hook Elementary School. Before his devastating act, he was diagnosed with depression, anxiety, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. He was diagnosed, but unfortunately, untreated. This is an extreme example of what the mental illness stigma can cause. According to the Mayo Clinic, some harmful signs of mental stigma can include reluctance to seek treatment, misunderstanding among family, friends, and coworkers, and even health insurance that doesn't cover your mental illness. The National Alliance on Mental Illness says that most people who live with a mental illness have at some point been blamed for their condition, or told that it is something they could control if they only tried hard enough. This is the unwieldy power that stigma holds. It is so important that we do what we can to reduce the stigma surrounding mental health. The best way we can all fight stigma is to talk openly about mental health. Angelina Kristi Taylor fights stigma by sharing her personal experiences through bipolar disorder and PTSD. She says, "Even if this helps one person, it is worth it for me." If you're struggling with a mental illness, it is so important that you ask for help. Sources of Strength is a program that helps with that. It helps everyone understand what mental illness is and encourages us to ask for help. Sources of Strength sets up a support system for those of us who may be struggling, and it is so important that we continue to work towards destigmatizing mental illness. By supporting Sources of Strength, we are supporting a movement and a cause that is much bigger than any of us individually. However, each and every one of us can have an impact on someone's life. I hope that I've encouraged you all to break through the mental illness stigma, but the truth is that I've had to do the same. 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. My mom got me into a therapist, and I started seeing a doctor. They got me on antidepressants that worked for a while, but after a few months, I began to have some side effects, hallucinations or memory problems. I explained them to my mom, my doctor, and my therapist. They told me that I would only be having these side effects on this class of drug if I had a chance of being bipolar. So they got me off the medication and put me on a safe antidepressants for individuals with bipolar. Now, because I am a teenager, it is too young to tell if I have this illness. However, I do have signs and symptoms that line up with bipolar. Bipolar runs in my family, and it is an illness. Even if I do have it, it will never define me. It will never be who I am. For a while, I struggled with telling people that I have anxiety and depression, but I have come to realize that telling people and normalizing mental illnesses and treatment is a part of a solution that can inspire people to do the same. 1 in 5 people, like me, have a mental illness, and many more have a problem with that. I hope that none of you do now. Thank you.
So I love what Liz said when she said that it's so much bigger than each of us. And I think it's so important that it just shows how important it is for our young people to be involved in helping their peers identify what it is that can help them to get through and to times when they're struggling. So thank you, Liz. There we go. So it's kind of like what Liz said when she talked about how we have to talk about asking for help, and we have to start sharing the message that it's okay to ask for help. And that's where, like I shared earlier, that hope, help, strength messaging comes in. Not that sad, shock, trauma. It's really easy to find ads or to find media that is, of the young person lying there with, a broken bottle, or we've seen the meth campaigns with the shock and the trauma to them. We used media here in Weston County for several years towards our underage drinking campaign about, encouraging parents to not provide alcohol to their young people, and we used ads with photos of, coffins and young people going to prom, and it was really that shock, that sadness, that trauma. And we know now that that is not the best way for us to have safe public health messaging. And so I'm gonna turn it over to Travis and the Fremont County crew, and they're gonna share a little bit about some of the messaging and how they are using the Hope, Help, Strength model and the Sources of Strength wheel to really make all of their media for prevention focus on that. So let's see. I don't know if you need me to do anything, Travis, but if you do, I'll just have to let you know.
No, I think we're good. So yeah, Travis Sylvester with Sylvester Customization. We work real close with Tauna in Fremont County, as well as the Fremont County Media Promo Team. And just a little bit of background on the Fremont County Media Promo Team. Mr. Burberry is front and center there on Tauna's screen. He is actually the chairman of the group. But really, it's kind of been a unique approach to prevention messaging. Tauna has locked us in a room and thrown the key away, brought in all the key media stakeholders from radio to newspaper to social and digital, and said, work together. We have these funds, we need to get the message out, and how are we going to do that? Naturally, there's a big education gap there. How do you communicate these things to these different medias and venues, as well as have a cohesive message? And I think everybody hopefully here knows that, especially when we're talking about mental health and promoting resources and doing those things to change for a positive community culture, you have to be working together. You know, one person can't be going this way and one person going that way. And to be honest with you, it was not a struggle. Everybody was there with the right intentions, and it worked well. But about, I would say it was about 9 months ago, Tauna came and said, we're doing sources of strength, and this is what we're going to do. And she showed us, and she gave us the whole synopsis of this is what sources of strength is. This is how the program's implemented with fidelity, and we need to incorporate this. So for, once again, about the last 9 months, we've really shifted the media for everything, really heavy on substance use, but also on the mental health and suicide prevention piece, which obviously we're here for today, is focusing on how do we use sources of strength to shape our media and our narrative that we're putting out to the community. And like Kristi said, really shifting away from this picture of a body bag, or a kid crying in the room alone, or any of that type of messaging, and saying, hey, we all have strengths. And you know, Kristi alluded to it earlier with the strengths. You don't have to have all 8 of those. You only need 1, maybe 2, 3, 4, 5. You're doing great. So how do we illuminate that we all have these strengths? And I think one thing, if we haven't learned in 2020, we've learned a lot in 2020, but if we haven't learned that things change, we're missing a big part of the last about 7 months here. So it's challenging, and every community is different within our own counties, within our own towns, and then each of those subgroups. They each have their different, you know, cliques and their niches and things that are going to get, you know, those motorhead kids excited. I couldn't change my own oil if I wanted to. So that stuff, whatever's going to work for them, and we need to reach those people, it isn't going to work for Travis Sylvester. So how do we package this up in a way that we give everybody their piece of the pie in a way that they can connect with and feel empowered? So with sources of strength and looking at how to implement it, it's really not easy. Prevention messaging is never easy, but it's very conducive to working in groups, and then also highlighting your community and your strengths. Some on a systematic level, maybe you're lacking, which pretty much most of Wyoming is, mental health resources. So how do we maybe highlight our other strengths so we can, you know, through our prevention programming, build on those strengths that we're really good, and then build capacity to help those and drive people to their strengths and help connect them. So on the screen here, you'll see just a few of our ads. These are light and bright. These were kind of during our summer series, if you will, of focusing on kids and really where they can go in different aspects of the will. Moving into this funding cycle for the 2020-2021 funding, we have been instructed and we have all jumped on board with the fact. Kristi, can you go to the next slide? This wheel that you saw earlier, every single ad that is produced in Fremont County, you will be able to point to one of these pieces of the pie and say, this is supporting mental health, this is supporting healthy activities, this is supporting, you know, finding a mentorship, and these different aspects. And once again, this is not just for Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. This is also on the radio. This is also through our movie theater ads. This goes virtually everywhere in driving that kind of culture shift. And one thing that we're doing, you know, we have an elevated suicide risk and completions in that middle-aged man kind of category. We all hear it, and how do we do that? This stuff doesn't go away when you age out, if you will, at 18. Like, these sources of strength exist when you're 30, 40, 50. You still have these same sources of strength, and we can highlight that through everything that we do. So that is our continued goal and objective, is to not only focus on youth, but how do we translate this to an entire community type thing? Kara is going to get into that with other implementation, and how do we take it so the community's buying into it, and it's not just us. But that's really kind of how we're using the media. I see in the chat box there's a question: are these ads translated into other languages, specifically Spanish? To date, we have not. That is something that's changing. Fremont County has the only reservation in Wyoming, as I believe most would probably know. And we have set an objective, once again, internally through the media promo team, that I believe it's 120 1 in 5 ads has to be predominantly Native American driven, because once again, we kind of did a self-assessment at the end of our funding cycle, and we said, we have not done as much with our creative to this population. And it's a population that's a big influence on our community, but also a big opportunity to connect these kids and these adults with different resources that exist. So that's one thing that we're really focusing on. And then that inclusion piece for adding things like adding different languages, Spanish, using the power of social media and different, digital targeting, which we won't get into because then I get really excited, but utilizing those so we can have virtually the same ad or very similar ad, and we can change the language and we can reach kids, or once again, adults in their native language. So we can make sure that if you prefer to read in Spanish, maybe you're bilingual, but if you prefer to get this ad in Spanish and it's going to make a bigger impact on you, we'll get you that ad in Spanish. So that is something that we have not done to date, but something that we are definitely working towards, and something that you'll be seeing in the future is really, really a focus on cultural inclusion and expanding our messaging to include those folks.
Awesome. Thank you, Travis.
Yep.
Tauna, Kara, did you want to add anything to the media piece from your end?
I'm just happy to be here. I'm thrilled that we have such a great promo media team. I do want to let everybody know that I got really stoked about sources of strength when Kristi brought it to Wyoming, and I was fortunate enough to go to the training in Casper. I visited with some of the school superintendents, some school staff. We have 8 school districts here in Fremont County, and for some reason they thought it was cool but didn't really want to get their feet wet. I visited with Kara, who will visit with you here in a little bit, and we talked about how sources of strength could be implemented within Big Brothers Big Sisters. And I feel really fortunate that I have Lacey Clark from Land Valley High School with us here today, listening to hear what sources of strength is about. So that's enough for me.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Tauna. So, Tauna kind of already touched on the T for T that we had in Wyoming here last fall, but this is kind of implementation timeline for how sources of strength has kind of rolled out in Wyoming. It's not just those 3 counties that are represented on this Zoom today. Cody and Park County have been using sources of strength for several years now, and they have used sources of strength in Laramie County as well, in Cheyenne, and it's also been used in Albany County. Those have been kind of here and there throughout. I mean, it's been several years. I couldn't even tell you exactly what year it was that they implemented that. But what we did is we kind of just put on this timeline the last 5 years and how things have kind of rolled out and really kind of picked up steam since then. So Sources of Strength was implemented at Sheridan High School in 2015. And Anne is a prevention specialist in Sheridan County, and while she wasn't the prevention specialist in 2015 when they implemented, she was on the school board and was a part of the decision to implement Sources of Strength. And so she's going to share a little bit about that and how that has worked for them. And I'm going to try to fix my camera. Go ahead, Anne.
Okay, thanks, Kristi. So I've been on the school board for several years, and about 5 years ago, we had 4 attempts in 1 year at Sheridan High School. And so as a school board and as an administration, obviously, we were looking for something that we could do better. Obviously, we were not being very effective in, our suicide prevention. All of our freshmen at Sheridan High School get QPR in their health class. So we, have been doing that. But like Kristi said, when you think about the river, we're far beyond that. At that point of QPR, you're far beyond that. And so it was really interesting. And so I went through the adult advisor training in 2015. And as both a parent and a school board member, it was really powerful. I remember the national trainer asking us, go home and ask your kids who are their mentors. And so I went home that night and we were having dinner, and I have 3 kiddos, and one in high school at that time, one in junior high, and then a grade school. And neither one of them said my husband or I, which at first you're kind of taken back. You're like, oh my gosh, I've invested my whole life in you almost. And I'm not your, healthy adult. But then I've really come to realize, having put this program in our schools, is that I am so thankful that my kids are able to identify other adults, looking at that wheel, other strengths in their lives. My son said one of the football coaches, our daughter said, her junior high counselor. And again, that just was so powerful. And that's really, when I started as a prevention manager, that was really kind of my reason for putting it in, because I realized that we have, like Travis has said and Kristi said, we have a lot of these assets already. We have a lot of these strengths. So we're not looking at a deficit, we're looking at what we already have and how we can improve and build on that.
I think that it's interesting, and that Ann said, they were kind of in a time of crisis in Sheridan County when they implemented sources of strength, and Weston County here in Newcastle, we were no different. So the fall of 2018, first week of October, I was in Cheyenne for a mandatory meeting, and I get a call from the guidance counselor, and said, well, hey, while you're there, we need something for suicide prevention. What we're doing isn't working. And the counselor's office, the principal's office, had been a revolving door from the end of August to the first part of October. And at that point in time, in that first week of October, we had 7 students in our high school. And mind you, we are about a population of about 200 students, give or take. We had 7 students who had either were in inpatient treatment, had been sent out of state for treatment, were at WBI, or who had been in treatment, who had been seeking mental health inpatient and had been home and were still struggling. And so we started looking and reached out, and was suggested that Sources of Strength is something we look at. Sources of Strength is not an inexpensive program. That is one of the drawbacks. It was something that we really we struggled with. And my superintendent of District 1 said at the time, he said, yes, there's a cost associated to it, but the last time I checked, that's not in anything comparison to what it costs for a funeral of a student. And that has stuck with me since that day. Then we had that conversation, and we've figured out how to make it work. And so that was the 1st of October. The second week of November, they sent myself and one other staff member to New York to be trained as trainers, and we implemented starting December 1st. And so it was a whirlwind, and it was not the way I would suggest implementation goes. There's a process that really should happen prior to that we can talk a little bit more about. But it happened. The reason it happened was important, and it still has been effective for us. And so because of that, and once I went through that training, and the staff member who went through it with me on the way home on the plane, we both talked about how important it was and how it all made sense to us, and how we wish we would have known this when we were young people, and how it could have helped us in the different trials that we had went through, and how we knew that it was what we needed to be doing. And I just, it was like a light at the end of the tunnel for me. I've done a lot of different things in prevention, and to me, this just seemed to be like an answer to a lot of the things that we were struggling with. So in 2019, last fall, we worked with the Episcopal Diocese. Press Stevens was invaluable in that process, and they funded the T for T to be held in Wyoming. So the Episcopal Diocese funded the entire cost of that training, and we brought 2 national trainers to Casper, and we had a T for T. And so we had a variety of different counties represented, and several of them left with trainers, provisional trainers, so that they could implement Sources of Strength. in their communities. And that was also after that Anne was able to get sources of strength implemented at Tongue River High School and Sheridan Junior High. And we have since then, and now into 2020, moving into 2021, have seen almost like a movement continue across the state of Wyoming. And while we don't have solid implementation in all of the counties that are expressing interest or who were at that T for T, what we do have is the capacity building happening and them working on getting buy-in so that they can implement sources of strength. And it's not an overnight thing. It takes a lot of work to get community buy-in, to get school district buy-in. Tauna is not alone in the fact that her districts are interested and they know it's important. But when we look at all of the things that our school districts have on their plate, especially now, this school year, you know, it's really difficult to ask them to add one more thing or for them to figure out how is this going to fit. And to be honest, had we not been in that crisis mode at that point in time in the fall of 2018, I'm sure it would have been much harder for me to get buy-in from my school district to implement sources of strength as well. And I know it would have been a financial issue for them to identify the funds that they could use to implement. So I think it's really important to remember, and I always try to echo, and when Tauna and I have had conversations about the fact that, you know, it's really difficult to sometimes to really get districts to take that jump and to implement something in their schools, but that's okay. And it's much better to really work on that capacity and that buy-in than to jump in and try to implement when your county and your districts are not ready to do that. And so there's nothing wrong with looking at other places that might be able to implement. One of the questions that seems to happen the most or get asked the most, I've had several conference calls with different districts and superintendents and prevention specialists who are wanting to implement sources of strength. And they're always asked, well, how much time is this going to take out of our school day? And how much more work is it going to be on our teachers? Very legitimate questions. And the way sources of strength works, because it's campaigns and it's driven by peers, my answer is always, well, that depends on your school, that depends on your peer leaders, that depends on your adult advisors. And for schools who are trying to figure out how they're going to make this work in their school day and where they can make it fit, sometimes it's easier if they just know it's going to take 15 minutes and this is what's going to be expected of us. And so while that flexibility is a huge perk and it makes it so fantastic that you can personalize that to your community and to your own students, it also can be difficult in selling the program because it's not black and white. There's a lot of flexibility and a lot of things that can change. So that's kind of where we're at with the implementation of sources of strength. It's pretty exciting to me that we have seen that movement really continue across the state of Wyoming, and we have a lot of districts and communities who really do see the value. They're just really trying to figure out how to make that work for them. Tauna, and did I miss anything in that little 5-year timeline?
No.
Okay.
I think it's good.
All right. So what we wanted to do after I kind of give you the rundown there of the program and how it kind of works is to highlight how each of our counties are implementing sources of strength and some of the ways that our peer leaders are making things happen in our county. And so in Weston County right now, we just have sources of strength at Newcastle High School in District 1. We are working, our plan was to implement in District 7 and Upstream this fall, but that's, we're not sure how that's gonna look just yet. So right now we're still working with just Newcastle High School. And we are actually starting year 3 for us. The logo on the right, at least the right of my screen, our Sources of Strength logo, that's a logo that was designed by one of our peer leaders. So Doggy Head is our mascot, and then the wheel within, and that's something that they have shared, that's actually been shared with the National Sources of Strength crew. That's what they put on their their t-shirts and some kind of swag that they created. And so we're really trying to create a different culture within our school. We know that our culture really needs improved. So this was one of those big projects that our peer leaders just needed to have happen. It was just something they really wanted to have happen, and they wanted it to happen the first year of our Sources of Strength. So this is a hallway going towards our commons outside of our practice gym. Big, long, plain old off-white hallway with a brick wall. So this was a project of about 3 months of getting that done. Several different peer leaders working on it. And their goal is for every student to have the opportunity to paint a brick. And initially it started with, we wanted each student to identify a strength on the wheel that they were strongest in and tie that to their brick. Well, if you take a look at the bricks, you will see that most of them really don't tie to a particular strength. But what it is it's a positive piece. So there's the brick that says be proud of how hard you are trying. There's one that's just a mural of the mountains. There's several that have quotes on them. We just really gave the students the opportunity to put their mark on this wall. And while it wasn't what we intended when we first started, it has really turned into a pretty neat art piece that our students really want to be a part of. And while we've done this will be the 2.5 years we've been doing this, we've only had one brick that was inappropriate that we had to have repainted over. So we were pretty happy about that. Most of them have all been, just a real positive quote or something, a word of wisdom or whatever. And so that's been kind of a progress. That's just a work in progress that's going to continue. So these are pictures of a staff breakfast that we did last January. These are all peer leaders who were sharing different pieces of the wheel with the staff. Our staff got the kind of the real down and dirty version of the first 3 slides that we shared with you. So they really had kind of a basic knowledge of sources of strength and what it is we were trying to do with our students. The students made pancakes, and we had sausage and juice and fruit, and they served breakfast to all of the staff. This was district-wide, not just our high school students. All of the district was invited. And even though it took us a while because all of the breakers kept blowing because of the roasters warming the sausage, it really did end up being a fun event. This is one of our adult advisors. That's Pastor Brenda. So she is the pastor at the United Methodist Church here in Newcastle, and it's been amazing having her as one of our adult advisors. And she has started implementing pieces of the wheel and sources of strength into her message church, her youth group that she does. So one of the students' favorite activities that we do in the peer leader training is what we call the poster activity. So you can see in a couple of pictures, the staff are all drawing on one big white poster board. And what we asked them to do was we gave them 5 minutes and said, we want you to draw, write, whatever you want to do, what makes you happy or what you turn to in times of stress, when you're stressed. And so they all had a piece of that paper, and they all identified what basically their healthy activities were. And then we have those all displayed on a wall in our high school, in our upstairs hallway. So it's a big wall that says staff sources of strength, and then they have identified all of what their sources of strength are. And then we just had a little special Mickey Mouse pancake that our curriculum director had requested, and so the kids had made her that. So it was really a pretty fun morning for the students. This was actually last fall, so this was one of the first activities the students did last fall. This was at their they called it the activity fair, and all of the different groups, so FBLA, Student Council, FFA, FHA, you name it, they all had a little table, and students could go around and visit. And so they had this wheel that they made, and the students could spin the wheel, and then if they told them what was a strength of theirs and identified that, they were able to get a prize. We had lanyards and t-shirts and all different kinds of things. And then we also asked the students, you see these postcards right there. We asked the students to write a postcard to someone, or a note card to one of their trusted adults. And so they wrote on those, and then we asked them to give them to whoever that person was for them. The kids threw it on Instagram, and social media has been really big for them. So that was just kind of another fun activity we did. Probably our most effective campaign that we have done to date happened during quarantine. It is a challenge to get a group of peer leaders together over Zoom and try to identify things that you can do to continue working on sources of strength, continue campaigns. But one of our students came up with this quarantine challenge. And so we started this on Easter Sunday, and each student, we had 8 different peer leaders who each took a day, and then they would post it on Facebook, Instagram, and on Snapchat. And they asked their fellow peers and community members, whomever, to follow along with the quarantine. And they asked them to either tag nuke.sos, especially on Instagram, or the hashtag DogieStrong. And if they tagged them in their post, and they did that for all 8 days, then they had a chance to win a $25 Amazon gift card. And so these were just a few of the posts. This was one of our adult advisors who shared that her mental health activity was about cooking with her daughter that day. This is one of our student peer leaders. This was her trusted adult, her mentor. And then this was another one of our adult advisors. This is also my co-trainer, Sally, and she shared about her mentor. These two were Facebook. This was an Instagram, and then this was an Instagram. Avery is one of our go-getter peer leaders, and this was his post on Instagram, his grandma, for Wednesday for Mentor Day. And the super cool thing about this was that the National Sources of Strength crew shouted out Avery in identifying his mentor. And then this was just a little snapshot of the reach that we had with, this is just Facebook because we're still working on the Instagram. I'm not super great on Instagram, and the peer leaders are still working on getting us those numbers. That's not something they're super thrilled about giving us numbers, but we're working on that. But so you can see within less than a month, we had 898 reaches, which was up like 846 from the month before. Our engagements were huge. We had new page likes. We also had, there were 28 other high school Sources of Strength peer leader groups who borrowed our quarantine social media challenge and adapted it across the country. So that was pretty cool that our students had come up with that, and it has been our most effective campaign yet. And so as we're still kind of navigating these virtual times, we're actually probably going to be focusing a lot on our social media, and we're looking at a YouTube channel and some ways to really get our Sources of Strength campaigns out in our community, because we know that everyone in general is struggling with coping, all the way from young adults, young people, to senior citizens. So that's just kind of in a nutshell. Some of the things that we have been doing, some things that have been successful for us, have been fun for us at Newcastle High School. So I will let Ann take over for Sheridan. And Ann, when you're ready for me to flip the slide, you just tell me.
Okay, thank you. So along with implementing, supporting the Sheridan High School Sources of Strength program that was already going, and then implementing it in Tongue River High School and this junior high. I wanted to put it in as one of my overarching prevention strategies. Again, like Kristi said, talking about that resilience piece, talking about, you know, these strengths that we all have that we can apply as adults, you know, not just as children. And I really thought it was important for that. And so I did that as well. So last June, one thing I would say too is the collaborations have been amazing and are really important. Last June, there were 5 of us from Sheridan County who traveled down to Colorado to do the T for T. And so the Episcopal Church, the local one, paid for one of the Tongue River Adult Advisors. Tongue River District 1 paid for the other one. District 2, which is Sheridan, paid for their 2 advisors, and then I used prevention money to pay. So again, you could see that people are invested and people really wanted this to work. Go ahead.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you. So last November, we decided to put it all into motion in 1 week in November. And we brought a national trainer out, and Monday through Thursday, we had 6 different events. So Monday, we did our adult advisor training for both Tongue River, the junior high, and then anyone from the high school who wanted to come and get a refresher. That night, we did a parent community night out at Tongue River. Tuesday morning, then we did the peer leader training out at Tongue River. We trained probably about 25 students out there at the high school. Wednesday, we did the training for the junior high, which you are seeing the pictures of right here. And then that night, we had a community night in Sheridan County in Sheridan District 2. And then Thursday morning, I really wanted again to end with that piece and begin with that piece of our community. And so we had a community county leaders breakfast. I invited everyone I could think of. You know, we had some of our senators there. I had my county commissioners there, our city council, our sheriff, but we really just sent out all of the foundations in Sheridan County, of which there are quite a few, you know, their leaders, anyone who was a leader that we could identify. And we had quite a good turnout. Kristi came over to help us, and that was fantastic. But it really was amazing, again, to see the tie-in and to see how you can put it in schools and in the county overall. So what was really cool is we trained 22 students at the junior high, and that's the page with the picture with the flag where they're all kind of pointing and laughing. That was their goofy picture. And so we trained those 22 students in November. And what was really great is they had 100% attendance. They would meet Friday mornings before school. And they had 100% attendance until COVID hit in February. So they were really getting some amazing things done. This was one of the campaigns that they did, and this is called a Thankfulness Campaign. And again, it's unique to each school because every school can do their own different campaigns. They can use something that's from national sources of strength, or they can use something that they have created themselves. And so on these little sheets of paper, you write down 3 things that you are thankful for. And so you can see here they're putting them up. But this campaign reached over 900 kids in the junior high because they had them out. They had kids filling them out. They had a table, you know, several days of the week. And then they put them up in this hallway. In this hallway on our junior high campus, we have 2 buildings. And so this leads out to the next building. So again, 900 kids a day saw this campaign. So although you have your core group, you really can expand your reach. And that's what's really fun about this program as well, is it can be as big or as small as you want it. And one thing too, I have had the question asked is, what do teachers have to do and how much time will this take out of class time? And really what you need are those strong adult advisors. We have we have 4 at the junior high, we have 2 at Tongue River, and we have 4 at the high school in Sheridan. And they really are, you know, the people who do all of the groundwork. And then also, like Kristi said, they kind of keep the peer leaders in check because the peer leaders are just so amazing and they will come up. For instance, our junior high peer leaders, they wanted to do a talent show. And so one of the adult advisors, you can see her in the bottom left picture on the right, she called me and she's like, how do I make this? How do we rein this in? How do we make this happen? But also, you know, keep it within check. And so they just really worked with the different schools. All of the different schools had a student create a t-shirt and create a design for a t-shirt, and that was really fun. So they all have different swag that they can wear now this next year. And then for, this was good timing as well. On February 21st, our junior high kiddos, we had a in-service day. And so our kiddos, about 10 of those 22, presented sources of strength to the entire junior high staff, which was over 100 people. And I was there both as my prevention role and then as a school board member. And it was so amazing to see these kids, and they know this wheel up and down. And like Kristi said, really applying it to their own lives and really, you know, making it personal. And they were all dressed in the different colors of the wheel. So those who talked about, you know, healthy activities were dressed in that color. And those who talked about mentors were dressed in yellow. And I have never had such great feedback on an in-service training. So that was really amazing. And it really then solidified for those teachers and those staff members who kind of had heard about it, but didn't really know what it was, you know, it really then kind of gave them that full picture, which was really neat to see. Someone asked over there about how did it change during COVID? And so during COVID, both of our, the junior high and high school and Tongue River, they all did the Zoom calls, and sometimes they were good, sometimes they were great. The high school actually did a really nice job of doing their Zooms. They would do them Friday morning at 8:45 or 7:45, depending on the day. And one day I was on that call with them, and there was over 40 staff and students on that call. So it was really amazing to see how those students, again, would keep going and just pick it up. One thing I would say, and again, like Kristi said, there are hiccups with everything. Last year, all of our peer leaders at the high school, kind of the lead peer leaders, were seniors. And so when they graduated this year, you know, we kind of had to reset. And so this year they selected someone who's a junior, someone who's a senior, and then someone who's a sophomore. So they have that continuity going forward of, oh, that we did this campaign, you know, last year, we did this campaign 2 years ago. So, you know, we're definitely learning things all the time. The other neat thing that we did during COVID was we created a mental health resource list for Sheridan County. And then we also had a sticker made of the wheel, and then a thankfulness sticker for Wyoming. And we were able to disseminate that to over 3,400 families. We put them in all the food bags that went out, whether the food group, which is a local group that feeds families on the weekends, the food bank, the Wyoming Rockies Food Bank, they went out in there. They went out in all of the bags for the school lunches. And so they also went out to all the graduating seniors. And so again, we were helping, you know, families realize there are local resources. We have the National Suicide Hotline number on there, some local numbers for a community connections program if they needed resources, Wyoming Northern Mental Health. And so that we had those mental health resources, and then also the, you know, so they could see the strengths. Go ahead. I think that's my last slide.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, you guys, I'm in the school building, and if you hear the bell or the announcements, I apologize. So hopefully I can mute that out for you. So yeah, Anne it's been really cool to see from my perspective, because I've been able to kind of watch how things have unfolded from afar in Sheridan County, and have really been able to pick up some cool ideas that we've been able to share across county lines. And I think that has really been important for us to kind of have that continuity and that movement continue. So Kara, I think, is going to be the first one to kind of talk about what's happening in Fremont County, or Tauna, I'm not sure which, and with Big Brothers Big Sisters. And so when you guys are ready for me to flip the slide, if you'll just tell me, and I'll go ahead and click for you. So go ahead and take it away.
Hey, Tauna, did you have something to say first? Oh, okay. I don't want to take up too much time. This has been a fantastic meeting, and I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions at the end. First of all, I just want to say I'm so happy to be here. This is fantastic. What a great group of people. I sincerely hope that I can be one of those ladies walking upstream to see what's going on with their kiddos and what we can do before they're in trouble. And thank goodness Big Brothers Big Sisters is one of those programs that helps me do that. So I am the program director of Big Brothers Big Sisters in Fremont County, and I absolutely love my job. I have just the greatest privilege to get to know the kids in my community, but also to get to know the volunteers and all the people that are really excited about making a difference in their lives. As you can see on the screen, Big Brothers Big Sisters, our theme or our motto is together we can ignite potential, right? So our kids have this amazing potential in their life, and we want to make sure that they reach that potential, that they realize they have that potential, and we want to help those in the community to help ignite or protect that potential for those kids. So that's what Big Brothers Big Sisters, we're making that possible for our communities and to reach out to the children in our communities. So if we can go ahead and slide to the next slide. Awesome. So we know that it all starts with the family. And the great thing about Big Brothers Big Sisters is that we don't want to take away from a family support. We just want to be there as a resource for the families and to help them. We don't want to take away from the family dynamic that they already have. We're just in the belief that it takes a village to raise a child, and we want to be a part of that and to make an influence and a help. So this is one of my families, one of my many families. This is just the cutest family. Actually, the girl in the middle with the whiter shirt, her name's Purple. Her and her match were actually the match of the year this year in Wyoming. And they just are a fantastic group. So Veronica Addison is their grandma. She has raised these children and several of other siblings from the time they were infants. But she knew that she needed some additional help. And so she reached out to Big Brothers Big Sisters. And this is where you start to see how well Big Brothers Big Sisters and Sources of Strength, the values are so similar and we are reaching the same goals. So here we look already at this amazing family support. And that's where every different dynamic of family, every different relationship that you reach out for, those are our family support, like what was mentioned before. It doesn't have to be whose family you were born into. And we are looking at the entire child. We don't just reach certain aspects of helping those child in school or preventing drugs, but looking at that entire child and giving the family that support. So this is a great connection between Big Brothers Big Sisters and Sources of Strength. So go ahead to the next slide. All right, positive friends. We have a lot of fun with Big Brothers Big Sisters. This is one of our activities last year. We wanted to talk about being safe on computers, and so we talked about online safety and what things our youth needed to know. But why not have a little fun with it too? So we had some dance going on and some friends hanging out. This is a whole different group of kids. This is CWC, our community college kids, all the way to homeschooling kids. The various elementary schools, teachers are there. This is a whole variety of people in the same environment making friends and growing closer to each other. We work with each of these kids to show how to have positive friendships, what a positive friendship looks like, avoiding those negative friends and friends that might draw you to something that you don't want in your life. So looking for the positive friends and the connections that you can make. So go ahead, next slide. Mentors, right? So with Big Brothers Big Sisters, I get to match bigs and littles. This is one of our fun matches here in Riverton. This is just this most dynamic group. As you can see, who wouldn't want to hang out with these two great people? And everybody has something to give. This community, there's people who have skills that can benefit a youth. And most of all, we all have a listening ear, right? So I tell my bigs that are thinking about volunteering with Big Brothers Big Sisters, I can talk to a kid for hours about how important it is to graduate from school. I can give them statistic after statistic about staying away from drugs. And I can show them all the sad examples of people who followed down discouraging paths and ended up in discouraging places. But it doesn't mean much, kind of like what you guys were saying with your hope instead of discouraging sad documents. But if I can give them a mentor, if I can give them someone amazing like Lizzie Pearson, who can just be her, just be Liz, and all of a sudden that kid sees, oh man, Liz is really cool. She's graduating from high school. She's gonna have all these scholarships. She's making these good choices. Oh my goodness, she has amazing friends. I wanna be just like Liz. And that works so much better and so much, kind of breaks my heart a little bit, because then they graduate and we hate to see them go, but we're also so excited for them to continue on. And it's amazing how these mentors, even after they graduate, they continue with those friendships. And you know, something special happens in that kid's life, you better believe they jump on the phone and they want to tell that mentor just amazing, and they want to see all the great stuff that they're doing even when they're moving on with their lives. So go ahead and go on to the next slide. Generosity. So Big Brothers Big Sisters, we have so many fun activities, and this is one of our activities that we did last fall, and it was based around Thanksgiving. And we wanted to make sure that our kids were thinking about those who had been inspirational to them, who had made an impact on them. So we made sugar cookies and we went around and gave them to people who had inspired us. So we have another activity that we're hoping to do here really soon that kind of goes along with the same idea, where we're going to challenge our bigs and our littles to write down 3 things that they're grateful for each day. And so that's going to follow right along with those values of sources of strength. They're already going to be picking up so many of these great values to carry on with their lives. And as we work through these values, we hope to give them the strength, right? The sources of their strength. So go ahead and go on to the next slide. This one I thought was really fun. This is a picture sent to me. This big and a little were going through a park, and a dragonfly landed on this kid's hand. Now this kid is really special. He's autistic, has some social skills, but struggles, and really struggles in school. And even though his big can't do a lot with, you know, changing anything in his life due to autism, he is definitely that ear, that listening ear. And when that dragonfly landed on this kid's hand, that was a really special moment for him. That kid felt this connection to something bigger and had this beautiful moment in nature. And I think we can show this moment of spirituality or a connection to something greater to all of the youth, and show them, you know, these little special moments that can really be meaningful. And that is just going to be an amazing source of strength for them. So go ahead to the next one. Medical access. Big Brothers Big Sisters kind of sees the that we're more of a reference, or we can refer our youth to different necessities of medical access. But when one of our youth is having a tough time, we want to be with them. So as it says here, one of my littles had a really hard sprain. She had an emergency gallbladder surgery, and she ended up having to stay longer in the hospital than planned. So she got a bouquet from her big, which was awesome. And due to COVID, not many people could come visit her. It was really kind of depressing for her. And her mom asked if Big Brothers Big Sisters could let her know that we were thinking of her. And so here was a little card of encouragement. This card mostly just says, hey, you're not alone. Listen to your doctors, listen to your parents. They know how to help you, but just remember you're not alone and we're thinking of you. And I just felt like that's the kind of connection we need to all have in this community. We need to all be reaching out and saying, you're not alone. This might seem hard, and I know you're hurting, but you're not alone. And I think that's gonna help in whatever struggle we're going through. So go ahead and go to the last one. So mental health. With Big Brothers Big Sisters, we realized this is a really hard year for our kids. I sent a bunch of, yay, you finished the first week of school notes to all my littles, and in the process was overwhelmed with everything that my kiddos were going through this year. They had been switched from different schools. Several of them had been pulled out of schools just in that first week and decided to do school at home. The idea of classrooms being separated, bigs that were suspected of COVID happened to go to the office and maybe happened to stay home. And just because another kid had a stomach ache, he had to go home for 10 days. And just so much anxiety that I want to make sure that these kiddos have the sources of strength. It's gonna get cold here soon. And an outlet for our community of being outside and getting some of that fresh air and that light is going to get harder and harder. And I am really a strong avid of having these kids have this resource in their schools right now. And I'm so excited that Tauna has given me the opportunity to work with her and the Fremont community to make sure that we can implement this, not only with my littles, but hopefully stretch it to making those connections at the schools and the entire community, and continue to see those children grow and find the sources of strength that they can, even in this hard and dark time. Really grateful for the opportunity to visit, and I think Tauna might have a little more that she wanted to add, and then maybe some questions from Liz too.
Actually, I'm not going to take up any more time. If Liz would like to speak or people have questions of Liz, that would be great.
Actually, Liz, I'll ask you the first question then. So what are you seeing? Well, first of all, go ahead and tell us where you first heard about sources of strength, and then tell us just what you see and how that can help you at your school.
Okay, so I may have to, can you hear me?
You sound great.
Okay, so I may have to have you ask me the second part of the question later, but so where I first heard of sources of strength is, this is actually kind of a sad story, but in the end it really shows that it was just meant to be in a way, I guess. But I was at a speech and debate tournament, and I was hanging out with one of the coaches from Thermopolis, Lyle Wiley, and I saw his pop socket, and it was the Sources of Strength wheel, and I complimented it. I was like, hey, that's a cool pop socket. So then he explained exactly what Sources of Strength was to me, and I thought that it was such a cool idea, and I wanted to get it instituted into our school. Well, the next day at the same speech and debate tournament, we find out that one of my friends and a person in our grade had committed suicide. And at that moment, I knew that I had to do something about this. And it was just, I thought it was so powerful to me that I had heard about this program the day before. It was almost as if someone was telling me, like, hey, you, like, just, it was like a sign, essentially. So it's sad, but also pretty cool. And then, what was the second part?
So Liz, how do you think this will help your school?
Okay, so walking through the halls and going in classrooms every single day, I hear multiple times a day, I hate myself, I don't want to be here, like, I wish I could die. I hear stuff like that all the time, and it is just so sad. And I feel like sources of strength, like we mentioned in the beginning of the slideshow, how it is an upstream program, I feel like that could just be so beneficial to these kids. Is instead of saying, oh, what can we do after, we say, what can we do to prevent this in the beginning? And I think we need more peer leaders, and we need more people to report this behavior, because even if people just make jokes about it, which is not a good habit, in every little joke, there is a layer of truth in there, no matter how small it may be. But there is a truth, and so implementing sources of strength would just be a great program for our school and to help the kids who are struggling.
Awesome, thank you. So yeah, and anyone else pop in with a question?
Could I ask, Liz, do you know if any junior high program stimulus might help that, where your self-image as junior high student could carry into high school? Do you think that might work?
I think that would definitely work, because I was even just thinking about this while we were talking, but my freshman year, there was a person who came to talk to us about suicide prevention and like their experiences and stuff. And it was a great speech, but it made me a little bit upset. And the reason I was a little bit upset was because that was the first time that I had been hearing about things like this. So I think definitely instituting things like this in the junior high level is extremely beneficial. And I know that I definitely could have used it.
And Pamela, I'll just jump in here. I'm glad you asked that, because Liz is actually going to be matched. She's Big Brothers Big Sisters, and her match is going to be from the middle school here in Riverton. And so we're hoping that that's exactly what we can do, have that resource from the middle school and Liz being a resource from the high school, and building that strength all the way through.
Pam, this is Ann and Sheridan again. And that was really our thought too, was if we can start this behavior and these actions and this positive thinking in the junior high. And so, you know, my goal in prevention is to have it in all of our junior highs and high schools in the district. We have 3 different districts. The other thing too is they have just come out with an elementary program. And so I have 2 elementaries that are interested, one in District 1, one in District 2, that are interested in piloting this. And so, you know, in the next 2 years, I hope to get that up and running. And so again, we can really start that mindset and that shift in thinking earlier, because I think you're right on. That's exactly what we need.
Thanks. So, Tracy Pohl, so I see your question. It says, do any of the schools offer space for youth to serve on an advisory board or leadership position so schools can hear their voices about all youth-related concerns from youth directly? So this is actually a really cool question. If I think I understand what you're trying to say. And there's actually a program that I have been working on starting, and the principals agreed to it. So I just need to put up some flyers and start a thing, but it's called Voices by Students, and it's essentially exactly that, except this would first be implemented at the high school level. So it wouldn't necessarily be at the other schools, but it would be about voicing our concerns about our school, about our community. We could talk to the school board. So yes, I am working on getting a program started for student voices specifically?
And in Weston County, we actually have we have a student representative on our school board. So that's kind of, other than the students of the Sources of Strength, peer leaders, and the other extracurricular kind of groups that work with our administration, the main voice is that youth leader that's on the school board. So it's a little bit different, but that's one way that they have the opportunity to share their voice and the student voice with the leadership.
That's super cool.
One other thing I wanted to mention, this is Anne again in Sheridan, is, you know, we talked a little bit about the cost, and this program is expensive, but I also would say the feedback and the support I get from nationals has been amazing. And so, you know, that piece too, that customer service piece is really beneficial. And I think Kristi would say that as well. And, you know, just having, again, other counties, Kristi and I have really done a good job, I think, of feeding off each other, picking each other's brains. Yes, this worked. No, this didn't. And that has really benefited. So as, you know, we expand this out throughout the state, and I know, you know, the legislature is really looking at what we can do as a state for suicide prevention. And so I know there are legislative committees that are looking at Sources of Strength as one of those programs. But definitely, you know, there is a cost, but there's also a huge benefit in the resources available.
Any other questions?
I have a quick question. I'd be curious, you know, if you're not able to implement it for whatever reason in a school setting, what ideas folks might have in terms of how it could be implemented otherwise.
That's a really great question, Michael. We had some folks from the recovery community in Carbon County who actually were looking at implementing Sources of Strength within their the recovery families, and they were really trying to identify how that might work for them. The Sources of Strength national team is really amazing about sharing how different communities across the country and in other countries have implemented Sources of Strength outside of the school. And really what it comes down to is having that peer group who can really kind of get the ball rolling and start those campaigns and get those campaigns off the ground. Because that's really the basis of the program is those campaigns, and then once those campaigns get going, then spreading the message and getting the community involved. So that's not, I know, a direct answer to your question, but I would just tell you that it is being done, and there's a lot of different places, even in Wyoming, who are looking at how that might work. So there are the resources available to help make it happen.
I would say, this is Anne again, just, you know, if there's others who have questions and, you know, want to talk offline, I know I'm definitely willing. I know Kristi's definitely willing to do that. So, you know, call us and pick our brain and see how we're doing it, what works, what doesn't. I know I'm going to talk to Kara because I work with my Big Brothers Big Sisters person here in Sheridan County. And so that's on my list as well. So.
And I'm going to put my email and cell number in the chat. And so maybe Anne and Kara, if you would do that as well. That way, if people do want to reach out, they have our contact information. And Michael, I would be more than happy to try to set you up or help you make the connection with the national crew if you have kind of an idea of what you think might, what you're thinking and how we could kind of make that work. So definitely just shoot me an email or give me a call or a text, and I would love to try to figure out how we can make that work.
That would be great. Thanks so much.
And Pamela, I just saw your comment about letting Press and Lori and the Episcopal Diocese know about the investment, and 1,000-fold for sure. Press and I have visited several different times, and I have expressed to him just the gratefulness for them to be able to bring that T4T in us to get that movement going. But we definitely could not have done it without their financial support. And I think it's really been a springboard for us to get things moving in the right direction with prevention, especially in a lot of our communities where we don't have the funding to do it on our own. You know, our smaller communities just don't always have especially the prevention dollars. So for sure, thank you. Any other questions or thoughts, comments? We have about 4 minutes left, it looks like.
I might throw one other question out there. You know, that analogy about the woman alongside the river is especially poignant for me personally, just because as a clinician with Fremont Counseling, I'm in a position of actually, you know, yanking people out of the river. And I guess in a sense what I mean is I'm assessing people in hospitals, determining if these children are going to be going to WBI or going home, and trying to work on plans for follow-up with those folks. So certainly I would be curious if Kristi or Ann or some other folks, and maybe Kara as well, have resources they might want me to have so that I can make sure that I distribute those to the families affected by folks who might have attempted suicide or are really decompensating fast. Any thoughts on that?
So, Michael, let me just make sure that I'm understanding what you're asking. So you're kind of wondering about like resources as far as materials that you could provide to clients, is that correct, for kind of suicide prevention, or more sources of strength specific?
Yeah, I suppose both. If I find that someone does not, you know, necessarily meet the necessary criteria for me to take away that person's right to choose for themselves. Mm-hmm. Typically what we would do is create a safety plan for that person that's done with other members of their family or their support network. There might be additional resources that that person or that family might want or be able to utilize in addition to the fairly simple follow-up plans that I might create with that individual. So I don't know if in your work, like within the school systems or with sources of strength, if there are materials that an individual could, you know, look at, go back to, in addition to what I've been giving them, that you think could be really effective for that person who might have followed through with an attempt and is now working on trying to get back on their feet.
For sure. I always, and I don't have the titles right here with me, but if you shoot me an email, I would definitely be glad to share them with you. Because I will, if I try to tell you off the top of my head, I will not remember them correctly. But AFSP has, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has some wonderful resources, and we actually have a Wyoming chapter. So they have some resources, and so does SPRC, and those are all available online. But I do have some of them in print that we use more often than others, and I can definitely share those titles with you.
Awesome.
But
Thank
those
you.
are, yeah,
Awesome.
those are great resources. Those are the two websites that I always, you know, when people ask, kind of refer to, and I can send you some contact information for our Wyoming board of AFSP too, so that you could be in connection with them. Bill Hawley in Johnson County is really active in the AFSP. He was the founding chairperson, and he would love to visit with you and love to help you out. So just shoot me an email, and then I can respond and get you that stuff too. And Ann and Kara or Tauna might have some other thoughts as well, but that's right off the top of my head what I would say.
They'll be getting emails as well. Thanks so much.
You bet.
And one of the most important things I would say to start doing in your work, Michael, or all of our work, is to start using this language. I think the help, hope, and strength instead of the shock and awe. It really is a different mindset. When I was talking with one professional in town, and trying to explain the upstream prevention, she said, "Well, where's the intervention?" And that was really hard for her to grasp, was that this is way ahead of that. We're not looking at right at the waterfall. And so I think using the language of the wheel and those strengths is really important. And I think that's something that we can all easily do.
I'd like to also interject, Becky Parker, the clinical director at Fremont Counseling, is the secretary of the Suicide Prevention Task Force. She also has all kinds of resources, AFSP, SPRC, and so she or I or Dana would be more than happy to help Michael with what he needs.
Hi, this is Lindsay from the Department of Health, and we're happy to provide any resources, connect you to any resources that you need. Just let us know.
Any other questions or comments before we wrap up? Well, thank you everyone for joining us and giving us the opportunity to share our passion for sources of strength. If you, I guess, couldn't tell by those of us who are sharing, I think it's all something that's very near and dear to all of our hearts now, and something we're all very passionate about. So feel free to shoot us a message or give us a call with our contact information. We'd all be more than happy to visit with you or to hook you up with anybody that might be able to help you if we couldn't. And thank you all very much. Have a wonderful weekend and stay safe.
Bye.